and our wonderful guest speakers from the Jane Goodall Institute of Canada. We're so excited to be here today to mark the 75th anniversary of World Food Day, which is really an organization that has been working to raise the awareness. Our wonderful guest speakers from the Jane Goodall Institute of Canada. We're so excited to be here today. For a second. All right, sorry about that, everyone. It's a little bit of a blurb as you go live on YouTube. Sometimes you get that feedback. So we are good to go now. So welcome again. My name is Sarah Flynn, and I'm with the Center for Global Education. And we are here today with students from Canada, from Argentina, from Kenya, from Bangladesh, to talk about what does World Food Day mean to us? How are we working in our own communities to address hunger, to address obesity, to address all the different aspects of food and food sustainability in our communities. Again, we have a speaker with us today from the Jane Goodall Institute of Canada who will be sharing their research, their perspective, their initiatives that they're undertaking as they work towards food sustainability in our country and around the world. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining you from Treaty 6 territory here in Edmonton, Alberta. It's the traditional meeting grounds, gathering place, and traveling route of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Blackfoot, Nakota Sioux, and I want to acknowledge all the many First Nations and Métis and Inuit footsteps who have marked this land for centuries. Now, in Canada, we do the land acknowledgement at the beginning of many events as a way of, as our process of reconciliation. Within Canada, we're going through a conversation in our communities about what does it mean to exist on land as settlers, as a part of colonial structures that created a lot of pain and hurt and death. And what does that mean? And how do we reconcile that past? And really together as Canadians, we have to talk about reconciliation and not just do land acknowledgements, but how do we practice reconciliation in our everyday lives, in our families, in our communities, in our schools, online, in these places of working now? And what do we constructively do to stay committed to that ongoing work? And so the land acknowledgement is more than just saying where I'm sitting today or where I'm joining you today, but it's about bringing in that Indigenous presence into institutions, whether they be online conversations or schools or workplaces, and then fostering that mutual respect. So within this conversation today about food security and food sustainability and just World Food Day, I think it's important to acknowledge that within Canada, Indigenous households are 3 times more likely than non-Indigenous households to experience food insecurity. And that's right now in our country, and nearly 5 times as likely to experience severe food insecurity. And there's a growing movement within Canada towards Indigenous food sovereignty. And really that means to provide and build frameworks and support systems to protect and conserve and restore Indigenous food systems and practices. And I think that though we won't be focusing on that today, that we should all take a pause to think about what that means and how maybe within our communities we can look to restoring food systems that were lost. And so that's where we maybe start our conversation today. And the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, is part of the United Nations, and it was founded in 1945. So today is the 75th anniversary of World Food Day. And the organization and World Food Day in particular is to raise awareness of the suffering caused by hunger and obesity and the importance of nutritious diets and food security and the needs for sustainable global food system. I mean, there's more than 2 billion people who do not have access to safe and nutritious and sufficient food right now. About 14% of the food produced for consumption is lost before reaching the market. From production to market, we lose 14%. There's projected to be a huge growth in our world population in the next 20 years. And so if our food systems don't transform, undernourishment and malnutrition will increase greatly. And the consequences could be increased inequality, increased unemployment, increased access decreased access to systems and services and the food that we need. And so I think today is a very, very important conversation. And before I turn it over to our speaker, Lauren, who's joining us from the Jane Goodall Institute of Canada, I'd like to have a chance for all of our schools that are here online to say hello and maybe ask one of the students to introduce themselves. And then if you are joining us today on YouTube, I'd love for you to just put in the comments where you're joining us from and maybe your name, and we'll give a shout out to you as well. And so please, if you're in our room, or not in our Zoom room, if you're on YouTube, don't feel like you're just having to watch this. Please comment, please make suggestions, please put questions, and we will have someone from our staff who's on YouTube and active there, and we'll bring that information over to us. Because I know some schools aren't able to join Zoom meetings, but we want you to still feel involved in this great conversation. So I'm going to start with our friends in Kenya, and then go to our friends in Bangladesh, and then go to our friends in Canada, and then Argentina. I know I didn't test your sound, but if you're there, you can pipe up at the end. I'll give a little time, but so first we're going to go to our friends in Kenya. If someone would like to introduce themselves and your school, we would love to give you a second. Over to you. Maya?
We go to school in Kenya. Currently we're doing online school. Our school is called St. Augustine's. We are very delighted to be here today to talk about World Food Day. It's a very good pleasure to be here and just have an amazing.
Wonderful, thank you so much, Maya, and we welcome you to the program today. Our friends now in Bangladesh, would you like to say hello? Oh, perfect.
Hi everyone, this is Atandrila and with my friend Dani Sadiba. We are from Vikarna Sanon School and College, Dhaka, Bangladesh. So we are really looking forward to this meeting about Global Food Health Day. So I guess that's it.
Perfect, thanks so much. And now over to Mr. Lake in Calgary.
Welcome to Calgary, Alberta. We're going to be the home of snow here pretty soon. Behind me here is a group of grade 12 students that are getting ready to graduate this year. Some of them are doing my biology 30 class, some will do natural resources, but we talk an awful lot about food, so this is a good one for us to be involved in.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Lake, and all of your students. And then I have a note here from our friends on YouTube that they're joining from Brazil. And Anna in particular wanted to say hello. And so welcome, Anna, and all of the students joining us from our Brazilian school. Now, Lauren, welcome to you as well. I know you're joining us here from across Canada on the other side, on the East Coast. But welcome, and I'd love to invite you to introduce yourself.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so I'm Lauren. I am the Roots and Shoots Manager at the Jane Goodall Institute of Canada here in Toronto. So I'm super excited to be here. Sustainable food is one of kind of our pillar programs that we provide resources for and funding for Roots and Shoots groups across Canada to do projects on sustainable food. We had a food waste campaign here in Toronto, so we've been doing a lot in this space. So it's really exciting to be talking to you guys today.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Now, I'm just gonna let you jump right in. I know you have some information to share and some learning for our students to do, and then we'll come back with some questions when you're ready, or if you'd like to put them on the spot and ask them a test question, we'll help you do that as well.
Sure, so I'll just, I'll play my presentation and I have some questions to kind of ask as we kind of go along. So, all right. So I'm gonna be talking about sustainable food today. And again, I'm the Roots and Shoots Manager at the Jane Goodall Institute of Canada. And I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about the Institute and the work we do, just so you guys kind of have a sense of the work as well. So our founder is Dr. Jane Goodall. So I hope most of you are familiar with Dr. Jane. She is a woman who's now 86 years old, but when she was in her 20s, she went to Tanzania, to Gombe National Forest to study the chimpanzees there. And ever since then, she has really become a figurehead of kind of conservation, of environmental work, and has really made people all over the world realize that chimpanzees are a lot more similar to us than we ever thought, and that we need to protect our environments in order to kind of all thrive and survive on this planet. And Jane Goodall Institutes are all over the world, in North America, South America, Africa, Europe, Asia, Australia. So I'm pretty sure there's one in Kenya for you guys there, and there might also be one in India. I'm not 100% sure, but I know also there's Roots and Shoots groups all over the world too. So if any of you as youth are interested in getting involved, please check out, go online. If you go to Roots and Shoots Global, you should be able to find the global website that has information about how to get involved depending on where your country is. And obviously for those joining from Canada, we are here in Canada too. We actually do work with some schools in Calgary already. So if you are interested in doing a project, kind of making the world a better place for people, animals, and the environment, please get in touch, and I'll have my contact information at the end of the presentation. So Roots and Shoots, we offer sustainability education experiences for young people. So this is a pollinator garden that a group of our students did in Winnipeg. And hopefully you guys know that pollinators are particularly important for our food supply. Pollinators like bees, butterflies pollinate about a third of the fruits and vegetables we eat on it, and even nuts and things. So pollinators are super important, and a lot of pollinators, particularly in North America, are dying because of pesticides in plants for farming. So when we're talking about sustainability, and this talks about food and all kinds of issues of sustainability, we're really talking about the needs of meeting the needs of the present generation without compromising the needs of future generations. And this is something that is very kind of something that really resonates with me now, as I'm currently 5 months pregnant. You guys can't really see as I'm sitting, but I'm going to be bringing a little girl into this world in about 4 months. And it's really kind of on my mind that I want to make sure that we have an earth and sustainable food and sustainable environments for her to grow up, and for all of you guys to grow up into, and for your children to have as well. So when we talk about sustainability, and in all aspects of sustainability, we're really talking about the interconnectedness of people, animals, and the environment. Because not only do we need to obviously protect environment and animals, but we also need to understand what issues there are for people. Because a lot of the times you can't solve those environmental or animal problems without looking at the people problems as well. So things like poverty, lack of access to resources, lack of access to good jobs are a lot of the reasons why we see the environmental degradation we do. So when we can lift up people out of poverty and out of those situations, we can usually also address those environmental and animal issues too. So we ensure that this is on the table in all the work we do, and that our Roots and Shoots projects also value this interconnectedness. And I really love this quote from Jane. Every individual matters, every individual has a role to play, and every individual makes a difference. And I think that's so key to understand, because even though we might feel really helpless, especially this year has been a tough year, I think, for everyone, and there definitely have been low moments. Maybe you guys have heard of Greta Thunberg, who is the lovely, amazing climate activist who went from doing, one person climate protests outside the Swedish parliament to now having, millions and millions of people marching for the climate across the world around this time last year. So really, all the work that you guys do as individuals really does make a difference. All right, so now we're going to talk about sustainable food, kind of the topic we're all here for. So I would love to get you guys to kind of just, what do you guys think is sustainable food? What does sustainable food mean to you? If anyone has any comments.
All right, what does sustainable food mean to you? Maya, go ahead. Yeah, I see you.
I think sustainable food means that food that would last longer, food which would be more nutritious and health beneficial. I think, I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's great.
All right, Mr. Lake, I see you put on your mask, so that maybe means a student's coming up or has something to share. Oh, the masking. Oh, you're muted. Sorry, Mr. Lake.
All right, there we go. That's better. Yeah,
There you are.
question on phones. This is how we do things these days. Do countries and areas with the Jane Goodall Institute have more sustainable environments and more sustainable food programs? So I guess it goes to your reach, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would hope that we do. I don't think we have kind of done that in terms of like a statistical research study. But we do, after every year, at least I know we do here in Canada, we get reports back from our groups that do projects. And we do see amazing results of school gardens, of composting programs, food waste reduction programs. So I really think it is helping, at least here in Canada. That's kind of the information I have most access to. But I really do think it is making a difference. Awesome. So yeah, for sustainable food, some of the things that I came up with in my research I found was sustainable food is food that protects the diversity of both plants and animals, food that takes into account the welfare of farmed and wild species, avoids damaging or wasting natural resources, and minimizes negative effects contributing to climate change. And I really like this graph kind of diagram here because it kind of takes into account all the different aspects that go into sustainable food and farming. So everything from water, food waste, making sure people are getting paid and treated appropriately, farm workers, that pesticides aren't being overly used, and that it is not negatively affecting climate change. So it's a kind of a big topic, and there's lots that goes into it. So I'm going to talk today about just a few of these aspects and things that you guys all can kind of take steps in order to reduce your impact on the environment and your carbon footprint when it comes to the foods you eat on a daily basis. And I also like this graph because it also takes into account that sustainable food should be fair and accessible. Sustainable food should not be something that's just available to wealthy families or individuals. It should be something that's accessible to everyone, no matter what their economic status. So I really think it's important to bring in that equity piece too, because sustainable food should be for everyone. Okay, so another kind of question for you guys. One is, why are food choices so important? And also, what do we see happening in this photo I have in the presentation? What do you think is happening there?
All right, Ian, I see your hand. Feel free to unmute.
So judging by how it looks like it's a deforested area cut down for farming. So what we eat does have a direct impact on the environment, especially now that the population is rising and we need more room for space. So when we eat, okay, people think eating meat is bad, which it is in some aspects, as in the ways like you need a lot of land for livestock, you have to feed the animals, and not all of the parts of the animals are eaten, so there is some wastage. But even for plants, you do need a optimum amount of space to plant them. So yes, what we eat has a direct impact on the environment. So yeah, that's how I feel about the topic.
That's great. Thank you so much. I'm actually going to be talking about eating meat and dairy later on today. So, but yeah, so this is a forest that's been clear cut, is what we call it, when everything is just cut down. And this is likely in Indonesia or Borneo. So this is likely a palm oil plantation, which unfortunately palm oil is a very popular oil that is in many packaged foods, processed foods, and also some beauty and health products. And it's a really cheap oil to produce. There's low labor costs. It's a high yield oil, so it means that it produces a lot of oil per plant. But unfortunately, this is coming at a cost to the ecosystems in Indonesia and Borneo. And now we're even seeing palm oil being planted also in Africa and South America as well. And this sort of deforestation, this clear cutting, is the leading cause of the 60% decline in wildlife that we've seen in the last 40 years, according to the World Wildlife Foundation. So even things like an oil, which doesn't seem very bad, is actually quite harmful to the environment. And it is thought that in 20 years, if palm oil production doesn't decrease in Indonesia and Borneo, then orangutans will go extinct in those areas. And that's the only places where they do live. So really, it's important that we read labels when we're choosing food. It's really hard sometimes to avoid palm oil, especially if you do buy lots of packaged foods. So it's really a good way to kind of shift more towards towards eating a more healthy whole food diet, because obviously you're not going to find palm oil in a banana or a coconut. So I think that that can be one case to limit your intake of palm oil, and also just double check the labels of the foods that you're buying at the grocery store too. And so also animal agriculture, like you mentioned, Ian, it does contribute to a lot of our climate change greenhouse gases, unfortunately, and uses about 70% of our agricultural land. So it's also one of those leading causes of deforestation and biodiversity loss. I'm going to talk a little bit about that more later. So also, as we mentioned, population is growing. You know, we're on track, I think, to be at almost 9 billion people in the next little while. So it's a lot. So as our population increases, we obviously have more people to feed, but we can only take up so much land because we need to leave land for our ecosystems, for the wild animals, for the plants, because we need that to survive as well. We are part of the environment, and we need those ecosystems, those tropical rainforests, those boreal forests here in Canada, to, you know, supply us with oxygen, to provide homes for all the wild animals that live there. So we can't just take over all the land. So we have to be looking at smarter farming practices to create higher yield products. And we also have to look at the issue of food waste, which I'm also going to talk about. So our food choices are also affecting climate change. So hopefully most of you know through the reports that have come out in the last few years that we only have until 2030, which is very short time from now, to lower our carbon emissions to keep our planet from warming over 1.5 degrees Celsius. And moving towards eating sustainably is really a major way that we can do this as individuals in lowering our carbon footprint. And also as our consumer choices change, we can also kind of change the way food is produced and get larger companies to move towards producing food in a sustainable way. As we kind of vote with our money and vote with our dollars, hopefully we can get those larger corporations to change. And climate change will also negatively affect our food supply. It can diminish nutrients in plants. It can slow food production. I know in Canada, we've had many wildfires out west in BC and Alberta, and that can destroy land, destroy crops, and especially also in California, they're having many forest fires. And then there's floods or droughts that can also affect our growing supply. And then also pests can come in from areas where maybe, especially here in Canada, we have quite cold winters, but that's getting less and less with climate change. And so pests can kind of come up into Canada from the US and affect our crops as well. Okay, so I'm going to talk about kind of three sustainable food choices that we can start making in our day-to-day lives to help reduce our carbon footprint and eat in a more sustainable way. So the first of those is wasting less food. So food waste is really one of the largest, but mostly kind of hidden issues when it comes to sustainable food. And this is coming from a more kind of North American perspective, because that was the research I was doing before. But in Canada, 58% of the food produced in Canada is wasted every year, which I think is unbelievable and so tragic, given not only in our country are there many people that don't have food to eat on a daily basis. It's horrible that all this food is going to waste when it's perfectly edible. So the food industry is responsible for most of this food waste at 85%, but we as consumers also have to take responsibility for the 14% of food that we waste. And a large amount of this food is wasted, particularly in North America, because it's not perfect enough. It's not a certain size, a certain shape, a certain color for it to then get sold on the grocery store shelves. So I think some of the things that we can do as consumers is to start not really caring what the fruits and vegetables necessarily look like, and choose to buy more ugly fruits and vegetables. I know here in Canada, one of our grocery store chains called No Frills, which is popular here in Ontario, they're starting to sell these like naturally imperfect produce bags. So it's produce like peppers or avocados or mushrooms or apples that might not necessarily make it onto the store shelf, but is perfectly fine to eat and being sold at a discounted price. So Project Drawdown is a really great website online looking at the different ways that we can reduce our impact on the climate. And they put reducing food waste is the third largest way that we can reduce our carbon footprint. And if food waste is actually responsible for about 8% of global emissions, because once food gets thrown into the garbage, it releases methane, which is a very powerful greenhouse gas. So given this information, are there any ways that you guys can think of that you could reduce food waste in your kind of day-to-day lives?
All right, food waste in our day-to-day lives. In Bangladesh, what do you do to try to reduce food waste? And Hajrullah, can you think of something?
Well, we get some of us, we get donations from restaurants. Not only about the wasted food, but also some of the things that are not used in that day, particular day.
Yeah.
We always prefer fresh food. So
I know.
yeah, basically what we get is from the restaurants.
Yes, I know that. I think there's a large movement of that in Edmonton as well, where their restaurants are trying to redistribute unused food to those who like to use it. Yeah. Wonderful. Thanks. Kenya, Ian, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
I have a question for Lauren.
Sure.
I wanted to ask, do you also feel that presentation for companies, okay, like Subway, when you go to a Subway restaurant, yeah, there's clear glass and you have all of the fresh vegetables. Seeing the fresh vegetables, you see them, you like them. But of course, out of those fresh, it came from a yield which didn't have all of them weren't fresh. Of course, there had to be some which weren't fresh, and where those go, most likely most of them go to waste. So do you feel that can also affect the way, you know, affect how we perceive how much we waste?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the food waste we don't see. So it's hard for us to kind of understand what is happening. But I think, companies like Subway, like larger companies, if instead of throwing out that kind of like the ends of a cucumber, say, or the ends of a tomato, they could compost that instead. I know in Toronto, we have a big composting program, which is great. So I can put my food scraps in the compost and the city picks it up every week, and that helps reduce the food waste that goes in the garbage and creates methane. Instead, it's being used to create soil. So if larger corporations can incorporate some sort of composting program and use that food waste for those purposes, I think those are ways that we can kind of reduce the food waste that we have. I think Maya has a question.
Yeah, Maya, go ahead.
My question is like, most countries most countries would like use like most like old fruits or like um old food to like make gas. Is that genuinely like a good effect, or like is it just making more harm to like the environment?
You mean like biofuel kind of thing, like using corn to make oil?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean that can help. In the US, it has become like a bit of an issue because now they're growing all this corn instead of growing, say, like other crops, and then using that corn for oil instead of using the corn for food. So it's like, and you need to use oil to grow corn anyways because of fertilizers and the energy it takes to like plant them and harvest them. So it's a bit of it can be a bit of a difficult cycle because it sometimes it's not super helpful. But if you're using, say, old oil that's already been used, and I know there are like cars that can use like biodiesel of like used frying oil in their cars, they can like retrofit them. I think that's great because you're using a product that normally would just get thrown out and you're repurposing it for another purpose instead of taking fresh oil, from the gas pump at a gas station and using it that way. So I think there's definitely different ways that you can use biofuels in more sustainable or less sustainable ways. So I think there's kind of two sides to it. Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Awesome. So next thing that I wanted to, oh, now my computer's not working. Are we gonna, Sorry, guys. Oh, there we go. So the next is choosing more local seasonal food. So this is more of, I think, an issue, say for us in Canada, where we have a limited growing season. We only have, the spring, summer, and fall where we can grow fruits and vegetables locally here. And then over the winter, we obviously can't. In some of our more tropical places like Kenya and Bangladesh, obviously, you guys can kind of grow things a lot more kind of all year round. But I think it's important that we're eating food that is made close to where we live, regardless of where we live. Because a lot of the food found in larger grocery stores tends to come from somewhere else. I know in Canada, a lot of our food is imported from the US. So that obviously results in carbon emissions from trucks transporting them, and also results in food that I feel even doesn't necessarily taste as good as eating local food when it's available. So for us in North America, I think trying to choose local and in-season food as much as possible can really help reduce our carbon footprint and also support local farmers in Canada versus supporting these big conglomerates of farmers in other countries. And for our international students here, maybe when if you ever go to the grocery store, I know I've been to Kenya. I lived in Kenya for 2 months. It's always great. You go to just the little markets and you get the food that the local vendors are selling, and you're getting that local food. So I think you guys are a lot more connected to your food sources than necessarily we are in North America. But I think it's really important to understand what is local and seasonal where you live. So going to a farmer's market wherever you are, you can really see what food is growing at what times of the year, what fruit is fresh. I love going to the farmers markets here in Toronto throughout the spring, fall, and summer just to see, what is fresh in June versus August versus October. And it's really exciting to be able to kind of eat with the seasons and eat what is local to your environment.
Now, Lauren, if you don't mind, I
Yeah.
have from our classroom, students were asked to map their food. Do you mind if I share this for a second? I'm gonna
Sure.
maybe
I can stop sharing
for a second. Yeah. But and here, mine will be loading now. But you can see that. So students picked their favorite food, and then we had some Canadian, some Brazilian, and some Kenyan students from a previous round. Picking their favorite foods and then mapping where the ingredients, if they had bought it on a package, where those mapped from. And so we found really interesting, Oliver in Calgary made jambalaya, and he found that some of his ingredients were from here in Canada, but many were from across Europe, even China. And there was roast beef, some hamburgers, and I mean, Alberta is very big beef industry, and so something like a burger was easy to find sourced here. Though I think the ketchup might have had an ingredient from overseas. But when we ran down, I think it was when we got to our friends from Kenya, it was really quite small, and so there's a shift in sort of even the cultural norms around buying local, and how do we shift Canadian, and we have some Brazilian students who were also sharing some of their favorite foods here. This is Camilla from Brazil, and I'm not going to try to pronounce this dish because it would do everyone a disservice. But how do we shift sort of our thoughts around making buying local like a cultural norm? How do you make that culture shift? But I just wanted to quickly share that students have been thinking about this for today, about where does my food come from, and what does that mean in terms of my contributions to world food systems.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And I think it's really important for us to understand where our food comes from, regardless of where we live. So I think that's so great that you guys did that. And it's so, I think, telling of where we live kind of really affects kind of where we can get our food from and how far it travels to get to us. So I think that's really great. Okay, so the last one I'm going to talk about is eating less meat and dairy. And I know this can be something that's maybe a little controversial, because meat and dairy can be really integrated into our cultural practices and into kind of our family structures of what we eat every day. But if we even just start to lessen the amount of meat we eat, we don't have to cut out meat and dairy totally. We can really make a big impact on our carbon footprint, because meat and dairy produces 60% of agriculture's greenhouse gas emissions, and really is not providing us with actually the most of our protein. A lot of people think that you have to eat meat to get protein, and if you don't eat meat, you're not going to get enough protein. But we actually find protein in all plant sources. It just varies depending on what source. Because if you think about it, a cow is eating plants, and they're turning those plants into muscles and into protein. So there must be protein in plants for those cows and chicken and pigs and other animals to turn those plant materials into the protein that they have in their bodies. So rearing animals for food also is not very efficient, because you can imagine we're growing all these fruits and vegetables or grains to feed the animals, and then we are then eating the animals, versus just growing plants to feed ourselves. And it takes a lot of grain to produce 1 kilogram of beef, versus if we could just eat those grains ourselves. And eating less meat and dairy is really the #1 way you can reduce your carbon footprint when it comes to food. And even if that's just eating meat 1 day less a week, if it's, doing meatless Mondays, or it's, going without meat a few times a week, that can make a difference. Personally, I'm vegetarian and about 80% vegan. I still eat cheese and like baked goods when I'm out and about, because those are things that I really enjoy. So I'm going to still eat those things, but I'm going to take other steps to reduce my carbon footprint by not eating any animals themselves, just eating some of their byproducts. So I think it's obviously a personal choice, and I don't want anyone to feel bad for eating meat, but even if you can just reduce it, it does make a huge difference in terms of your carbon footprint. Does anyone, yeah, Ian, you had a question?
Okay, I don't know if, okay, it's kind of a question.
Or comment?
So, okay, let me give a local example. So yeah, many people like to eat, okay, can I say insects?
Yeah.
Okay, so here's the factor which comes into play: disgust, or things that don't look appealing or don't sound appealing. Cause, okay, locusts have high amounts of protein. They're easy to find. They're cheap. You don't have to harvest them. You can find them anywhere. My dad eats them sometimes. Yeah. But if you look at a locust, the chances are your typical person won't want to eat a locust from the sidewalk. So they're pretty sustainable because they give us the amount of protein we need, and really they seem like the perfect thing, but they don't look good, and this affects the way it'll affect our future, because in our future we need more sustainable things to eat. So how do you feel about having to eat these animals which have the disgust factor into play?
Yeah, I mean, there is a movement here in North America to incorporate insects into food products. So I was at a food fair kind of thing, and they had bolognese, like a meat pasta sauce with crickets in it. So it was like ground up crickets or ground up mealworms. And I actually bought it just to like try, and it tasted good. You wouldn't notice that there was, insects in it. But yeah, no, I think eating insects is a really great way to get protein in a sustainable way. You can harvest them in a very small, area compared to, say, cows or chickens or pigs. So I think it's good. I think it is just getting over the disgust issue. But I think if you kind of dry them or you cook them and then you grind them up and into a powder, people really wouldn't notice the difference between eating that and, say, like a powdered other meat. But no, that's a great point to bring up. And I think it's something that we in kind of North America and Western cultures can really learn from places like Africa and other southern countries that eat more insects. I think, sorry, the teacher had a question. Sorry, I forget your name.
Mr. Lake.
Yeah, so I'm doing questions for the class who's sitting behind me right now. So Maya has a question, and it was a good one, and it's a hard one. All of these sustainable choices, being able to make those choices as a consumer. One of the things that a lot of my students have brought up and Maya pointed out is quite often these are targeted to people that are economically quite well off. It's very difficult to make these choices on what we would call a middle income kind of salary. So what's the movement out there? And they mentioned, they were mentioning earlier, just the numbers of people that they were seeing going to the local markets. But one of the things that is a big impediment for people making decisions is that cost. And quite often to eat sustainably becomes economically really hard to be quite viable. So how do we move the dial on that, was what she was kind of asking.
Yeah, I think that's totally true. I think there are ways to eat sustainably, when it comes to eating less meat. Things like beans, tofu, lentils, those are all really cheap to buy. None of these are expensive products, especially if you buy them dry and then soak them at home. And all of those usually cost less than meat products or dairy products. When it comes to, say, buying fake meats and fake dairy products, those usually cost more, if not the same, or more. So yes, that there's a cost prohibited there. And yes, going to farmers markets typically is more expensive. But I think there are initiatives, at least I know of, that in Toronto, where they're trying to get fresh local produce to areas of Toronto that are lower socioeconomic areas. And there's also grocery stores. There's one grocery store in Toronto that's a pay what you can grocery store. So basically you can go in and pay whatever you can. So they rely on people that have more money to pay more, and then people who don't have as much money can pay whatever they're able to. And they get a lot of their food donated from other organizations that have food left over. So it's also helping with the food waste issue. But I think it's difficult, especially now with COVID. I know food banks have been like having a lot more needs to be met and a lot more interest for people because people have lost their jobs and don't have that income anymore. So I think it can be difficult. But I think, we can all just work together to try to solve these problems, to try to, provide opportunities like this kind of pay what you can grocery store that is in Toronto, kind of supporting organizations that are doing that work.
And Mr. Lake, was it your students that were involved with our Queen Elizabeth High School students in Edmonton around the distributing seeds and buckets to communities in need? Was that your school or Aaron's?
Yeah. So one of the projects that we did that got started through COVID, people were worried about their access to food and those kinds of things. And one of the initiatives that came out of two schools here in Calgary, Robert Thirsk and the Central Memorial High School, was we wanted to get students and their families involved in growing their own food in their backyards. So we started a program called Grow Alberta, and we managed to get out over probably close to 1,400 starting gardening kits to families and students. We challenged Edmonton to be involved. We actually challenged Manitoba to be involved. So we're going to start that program again in May. The idea being we had people send us notes for the first time that they had ever gardened in their backyard, and they were sending us pictures of the food that they were growing for the first time. There was a real impetus based on COVID, really got people to think about where their food comes from. So we now have hundreds of students that now have their own gardens in their backyard, and we're bringing meat produce at the beginning of September, what came out of their own garden, just to share. So that was a really cool project that, as a positive that came out of COVID, that affected students and their families. That was a really big positive.
Well, that's awesome. And I think that's such a great way to do it, is to be growing our own food and to be more self-sufficient when it comes to our food and access to food. And a lot of our Roots and Shoots projects have been school gardens or, home gardens, so kids can learn how to grow their own food, because I think it's such a skill that we don't really have anymore, especially if we're growing up in a city. I'm not much of a green thumb, but my kind of goal with my partner is to eventually move kind of out of the city and to be self-sustaining on land for ourselves, because we really see that as kind of the future. So I think that's so great and so awesome for the work that you guys have done. So that's great.
And I know that in the students here in Edmonton really challenged themselves to distribute those seed kits to communities which were new Canadians. So perhaps they had arrived to Canada just at the beginning of COVID and didn't know where to access fresh food. And so providing them with the buckets that they could grow then on if they were in an apartment, on their patio. And so they didn't take up a lot of space, and that they were able to grow potatoes and vegetables that would sustain them through this time when maybe they couldn't go to farmers markets. They didn't even know where they were. And so I think that it's an awesome shows that we don't have to be you don't have to be old. You don't have to be an old person like me to make change. Like youth today can have these brilliant ideas that really serve their community and set examples of what we want the future of food sustainability to look like in each of our communities. And for low cost or with support of government funders, that youth can take these ideas and make them happen. So I wanted to highlight Mr. Lake in your class there at Robert Thirst, because it was such an amazing idea of really sort of putting these ideas into action. So sorry, Lauren, to interrupt here.
No, that's okay. No, that's awesome. Really good work. And that's kind of what Roots and Shoots is all about. So that's awesome to see. So then just something for you guys to start thinking about is kind of what are the sustainable food issues faced in your community? Obviously, every community is different when it comes to food access and sustainable food, especially when we're talking kind of on a global scale. And one of the really great ways to go about this is to do something called community mapping. And this is a way to understand what issues there are when it comes to sustainable food, to actually go out into your local community and see what those issues are, talk to local people, shop owners, people involved in the food industry to really get a grasp of what those issues are. I know in Toronto particularly, there's the issue of what we call like food deserts. So places where people don't have easy access to fresh, healthy foods. They either have to take transit or drive, and a lot of people don't have access to those things. So those are some of the issues we have here in Toronto, as well as things like food waste and like excess packaging are things that we also deal with. So are there any things that you guys through this kind of program have noticed as the sustainable food issues that your community has faced? Yeah, Ian?
Right.
Okay, here in Kenya, I find accessibility and the climate to play a role here. So let me give an example. So I realized in areas where there are food shortages, um, the climate's usually higher. It's more arid. Things are so it's harder to grow crops for yourself. Cause like in the foothills of mountains, like in the east, many people grow their own produce, but those in the north aren't able to. So I think climate plays a role in Kenya, and accessibility and production as well. I think in urban areas. So I think a way we can solve this right now in our state, but for the future, I would say maybe growing things in urban areas. Like there have been these designs of buildings in which you can grow things using modern technology. They take up much less space and they produce more for at a lower cost. Yeah. So I think that would be a way to solve our issues here in Kenya.
Oh, that's great. Anyone else wanted to comment?
So, and Tadrilla, in Bangladesh, like you're in a city. Do you find that there are many people growing? Like, is there local gardens, or do people grow things on balconies, or what's sort of the local growth, food growth?
So about that, the people living in the middle of the country, I mean the central region of the country, they usually live in apartments. So like me, we don't have that opportunity to grow food in our garden. We don't have any garden. We have a balcony, which is not so big. So yeah, we don't have that opportunity. And but Bangladesh is there. 80% of the people are in agricultural sector. Though we have poverty, we are working on it with different. But it's basically due to the non-profit organizations are working on it. I must say. Yeah, that's it.
Thanks so much for sharing that. Mhm. All right.
Okay, so here's just one map that was put together by some local people in just in Toronto. So we have like food waste seen in dumpsters, no fresh produce available, no local food options, few vegetarian options, too organic or expensive. So these are just some of the things that could be in your community. And by doing this, we can kind of see what those issues are and then take action. And I think that's such an important thing to feel like we can do. We can take action. We can take steps to solve these problems, either through educating our local community, restoring, so maybe doing a garden, motivating, so getting people to understand how they can make more sustainable food options, or advocating, writing letters to local people in government, either in your city or your province or territory or country, to make them realize that these are issues that need to be kind of out front and center and that we need to address them. So these are kind of the actions that we typically take for our Roots and Shoots projects, but really anyone can do if you want to take action. So yeah, so that's basically the presentation. So obviously I'm happy to answer any questions. And this is my contact information if you guys want to get in touch, and also our website. And also for those that are international, if you want to email me, I can help you get in touch with your local Roots and Shoots or Jane Goodall Institutes if you're interested in getting involved in this work. So thank you guys.
Wonderful. Now, I'd like to open it up. Does anyone have any questions on any of the presentation from today for our guest speaker, Lauren, with the Jane Goodall Institute of Canada? Well, it looks like we got, I mean, they were asking questions throughout, so I'm not too surprised that they're feeling good about the question situation. Now, if for our students who are joining us from Canada, I know we have some students from Toronto and Edmonton on YouTube. There's something in Canada called Rising Youth. And I know Mr. Lake's class has often accessed this resource. 2 thumbs up from him. So for youth who have ideas on community level projects, whether it be producing seed baskets or whatever you might want to do around in this time of COVID, that doesn't involve having a meeting, is Rising Youth Canada supplies small grants between $250 and $1,500 for youth to do projects in their communities. And so if you have an idea of how you want to, maybe you want to do an educational poster campaign, maybe you want to produce buttons, perhaps you want to distribute food kits, whatever it might be, they are willing to read a grant application alongside you and work through it, and then provide those funds so that you can actually put your ideas into action. Because so many times youth in Canada have great ideas. I wish I could do this. Oh, I want to do a Zoom cooking lesson with some of my friends. I mean, we would love to help you form those communities through these small project grants. And then all you have to do is go online, risingyouth.ca, and submit your idea, and they'll reach out and help you work. And if it needs a little bit of refining, they work alongside you to make sure that it's the best project it can be, and then they fund it. And I unfortunately, I don't know if programs like this exist in Kenya or Bangladesh or Brazil or any of the other places, Argentina, that are joining us today in our call. But in Canada, those are amazing opportunities for youth under the age of 30 to really get involved and have the funds to make projects work. Mr. Lake, do you have a couple of good projects I know that came out of Rising Youth?
Well, basically my job as a teacher, and for you students that have joined us, I thank you for your voice. Just find somebody that's willing to say yes. I say yes a lot to projects. So the Rising Youth project that came up last year, I can't show it to you because I moved my camera around, but they actually built a living desk in my classroom. So it's a desk that I work at that actually grows food. So you can actually eat and harvest food off the sides of my desk. So it has an aquarium, it has a bed on the bottom for plants, and then it has a trellising on both sides so that we can grow microgreens and food. And basically, if I'm sitting at my desk working, I can sit and eat because my food's being grown off my desk. That was an idea from a student who said, how do we take things like furniture in our room and make it to do something that it wouldn't normally do? And we used a Rising grant to do that. So.
Yeah, and I think it shows that even within your own school, so we might not have space in our homes. And I guess right now, a lot of us are I know Kenya and I think Bangladesh as well, you aren't actually going to schools right now. But when you're back, like maybe there's space within there and a champion teacher who can help you start a garden in your school or in a classroom. I know that one of our Alberta schools here, they have lots of space outside, but the weather isn't great for growing outdoors. It's in the mountains and the weather can change. And so they've built a classroom. They've dedicated a classroom to the fish aquaponic thing where you have fish in the fish tank and they fertilize the plants as they grow. And so there's different ways that you don't necessarily need a lot of room outdoors to encourage that sort of local food. And once you start going, it's like, oh, I can do this. I mean, I can't grow peppers because our Peppers and I seem to have a very caustic relationship, but I'm very good at growing lettuce. And so just trying these different things and seeing what works in your house, seeing what doesn't. There's no harm in giving it a try. Can you grow some basil? I know basil probably grows great in Kenya. I'm not sure if it's a good staple, but it's a great flavoring that we have in here and across Europe, but it doesn't grow great in Canada because it doesn't like the cold. But I bet it would flourish in Kenya. Can you think of, does any of our Kenyan friends have a home garden that they use or that they, yeah, Maya? And Amaka, did you raise your hand? What do you grow, Amaka, in your home garden?
In St. Austine's, we like go and plant trees in different parts of places, and then they grow like so that it can help more trees grow. And then, yeah.
Nice. Wonderful. Laura, did you want to add anything? You haven't spoken. I'd love to hear from you.
I just wanted to say in my house, since it's also an apartment, we don't have that much space. Like the only space that we can grow is a balcony. So in our balcony, we have like some herbs that we grow: basil, as you said, mint, oregano, rosemary. Yeah, so now we don't need to buy like those herbs in the store since we just grow them here.
Wonderful. That's so great. Thank you so much for sharing. I know as a part of the classroom we had, what's your favorite meal? And it was really just sort of my way of getting everyone's home recipes from around the world. So I have great recipes from Brazil now and Kenya. And I'm going to be cooking up a storm. It's going to be wonderful. Well, thank you, Lauren, for joining us today. I don't know if you have any sort of final guiding words for these students as we send them out on World Food Day to really think about these issues and talk to their parents and their friends about it.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me, and I hope the information was helpful and useful, and I really appreciate all of your comments and suggestions. I think you guys are already doing such good work in this space already, and we actually also have a grant program too for Roots and Shoots, so we provide up to $1,000 for this year. We're doing sustainable food, Indigenous perspective, and climate change projects that we're funding. So for those of you in Canada, if you're interested, you can go to rootsandshoots.ca and all the information is there for applying. Applications open in November through till the middle of December this fall.
Awesome. And maybe that's something that in Kenya and other countries that they can look at their local Roots and Shoots and see if they have similar programs.
Yeah, so every Roots and Shoots kind of does things their own way. So if you are interested, please contact me and I'm happy to kind of get you to the right person in your local country if they do have a Roots and Shoots there.
Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today for World Food Day. Thank you to our friends in Kenya and Bangladesh and Brazil and Argentina and Canada, of course. Thank you to Lauren from the Jane Goodall Institute of Canada for coming today and sharing your knowledge. And I just really think that it's a valuable conversation as we move into larger populations and climate change and all these impacts that we really need to start considering where we get our food from and how we sustainably move into the future. So thank you for the conversation today, and we hope to see you again soon. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Have a great day.